and welcome to another edition of NHS Talks Stories. A little bit about the National Hellenic Society. We are a nonprofit foundation that was founded to preserve, celebrate, honor Hellenic legacy here in America. And I'm so pleased to be able to do this session with a good friend and a great institution, the American School of Classical Studies, and its Executive Director, George Orfanakos, a passionate Greek, and just delighted to welcome and meet by Zoom, and looking very forward to doing it in real time, Professor Runnels. I'll kick it off to George to make that introduction, and then we can go right into it. Pleased to welcome both of you, Yasu George and Yasu Professor. Nice to see you and meet you.
Thank you, Art, and it's a joy to be with you tonight, and a greeting to all of our National Hellenic Society members across the country and perhaps throughout the world, wherever you may find yourself. It's been a while since we had our last webinar, and we have a special treat tonight. We get to hear from Curtis Runnels, and I've had many meetings, opportunities to meet some interesting people. And I have to say, Curtis is certainly one of the most interesting that I've ever met. And he's just a tremendous story. And I want to just give, by way of background, a little bit about who we're speaking with tonight. Curtis Runnels is Professor of Archaeology, Anthropology, and Classical Studies at Boston University. He has been a pioneer in the promotion of long-term studies of landscapes through the integration of geological and archaeological approaches in his fieldwork and publications on the very earliest periods of Greek history, Paleolithic through Neolithic. And it was recognized in 2019 when he was given the Archaeological Institute of America's highest award, its gold medal for distinguished archaeological achievement. That is no small feat. It is seriously the Hall of Fame of the AIA. And some of the names are there, very impressive. His work on Greek prehistory has also resulted in publications on the 19th century pioneers in that field, notably George Finlay and Heinrich Schliemann. And in the course of that work, he's become a prolific collector of early books, diaries, maps, and drawings. And that's what we're going to focus on tonight a little bit, which he has been subsequently not only collecting, and the term we use is bibliophile. He's not only collecting and searching and hunting for these things, and some of the stories by way of his search we'll get into a little bit, but he also is a benefactor because he uses his own funds to purchase these things, and he, together with his wife Priscilla Murray, are donating these things to the Gonadius Library and the archives of the American School. He's an alumnus of the American School, and he has been a member of the Academic Managing Committee of the school since 2006 and was elected an overseer of the Gonadius Library in 2019. So that is our introduction to Curtis. And to kick it off, actually, I'm going to ask you a simple question. Where did you grow up, Curtis? And how did you decide to pursue a career in archaeology?
Well, George, actually, that would take us down a rabbit hole of stories, because somebody who spent nearly half a century working in Greece, and who's a passionate Philhellene and lover of everything Greek, you'd think I had a Greek background, but the truth is I don't. I come from Kansas. I was born and raised in Lawrence, Kansas, from basically people who moved out there during the New England immigrant aid period before the Civil War. And they colonized parts of Kansas to make it into a free state. And so I was born in Kansas, and you might say I fell into Greece by total accident, because I became interested in archaeology just by the stuff that was outside the door. Arrowheads, rocks, old foundations of buildings, stories that people told me about the Santa Fe Trail and thing always had me out running around. My father was a geologist, and we went fossil hunting. He found the fossils, I found the arrowheads. So at one point I realized I wasn't going to be a geologist. And I even did a couple of little digs, one when I was about 8 years old, and then I dug up the backyard. There was a Civil War period house there that my parents allowed me to excavate so long as I left the vegetable garden intact, which I did. And I decided to be an archaeologist, and I was first interested in Rome. Actually, I was going to be a Roman specialist. I was just in love with Roman archaeology. Just fell into my lap, and I went off to the University of Kansas in Lawrence. They had a program in archaeology and joint anthropology classics. I was in both departments, got degrees in both areas. And while I was there, I got turned to prehistoric archaeology because I took a course, a very charismatic professor on human evolution, Paleolithic archaeology, Stone Age, that sort of thing. And I fell in love with that. And you're thinking, well, where does Greece come into this?
Yeah.
Well, I got to the point where it was time to go do something with this career. I had to go to a field school and then a graduate school. So I wanted to do Paleolithic archaeology somewhere in the old world. And at that moment, the only Paleolithic archaeology excavation going on that accepted American graduate students at least was Indiana University's excavations at Franklin Cave in the Argolith, which is, of course, a couple hours south of Athens, near the town of Granidi. And I had heard about it. I'd even seen an article in Archaeology magazine, but my advisor said, there's your best chance. So Paleolithic cave excavation, so off I went. Instead of Kenya or France, which had been my targets, it was in Greece. I knew nothing about Greece except one of my advisors had made some pasticcio, and I first met Sina at her house, and I knew, vaguely of its existence. And then I went. So I got off the ferry from Italy in Corfu. This was in April of 1973. And I guess you'd say it was just love at first sight. I'd been traveling through Europe for a couple of months, but when I got to Corfu, I loved it. And from that moment on, I just never turned back. And I discovered, now here's something else I found. I tell my own graduate students over several generations to do this. But I looked around and there was a lot of Paleolithic archaeology to be done, and there were no Paleolithic archaeologists because all the others had gone up to Africa and France and places that they'd heard of. And I realized I had an opportunity. So I stayed and I made my career there. And before long, of course, I got interested in everything, the language, the culture, the history of modern Greece. And I haven't wavered since then. Meanwhile, I also did Paleolithic archaeology. And everything has been in my lap ever since.
So,
that's wonderful.
Professor, let me just ask you. So you've done classical archaeology. You're a professor of classical studies, and your expertise is in Aegean prehistory. So I'm interested, and I've had the luxury to visit the Wiener lab in Greece at the campus. It's just an amazing, thank God for Malcolm Wiener, but I mean, just an incredible lab. And can you talk a little bit about the nexus between classical archaeology, Aegean prehistory, and maybe some artifacts that really got you jazzed in your studies that your aha or eureka, your eureka moment. I'm sure you've had several of those, but
I've had several of those. Well, my interest started with prehistory. So before I got there, I was interested in prehistoric archaeology. And the thing about, Greece, of course, is layered in cultures because you not only have the modern world and you've got the medieval world, the Byzantine, ancient, but then you have the Bronze Age, before that the Neolithic, and Aegean prehistory has been like peeling away an onion skin. So underneath the Neolithic turned out there was an older period of occupation. And when I got there, nobody really knew where that was or how it started. And that was where I saw my opportunity. At Franklin Cave, excavations had pushed back evidence of occupation to about 40,000 years ago. But there was no reason why that would be the beginning. Petrolina man, it's actually a woman, but it's a skull of an early form of human ancestor from Patolina Cave up in Chalkidiki had been discovered shortly before I arrived. So it was pretty clear that there had been people in Greece much earlier. But at that time, the scholarly opinion was that Greece was kind of like a cul-de-sac, a byway, was bypassed by early human movements. That didn't seem to me to be right. And so I set out to do a series of explorations that were intended to try to find the traces of earliest humans in the country. I'm not the only one, and I've worked with a great many colleagues, many branches of science, which is why the Wiener Lab is so important, because it brings together geologists, paleontologists, people who deal with ancient bones, ancient plant remains, human evolution in a physical sense, and my specialty, which is stone tools. Here, in fact, I've got one.
So do I. Art, do you have one behind you?
Not in my lab. If I was done in my lab, but I realized I've actually got one right here. I just have it by the lamp.
Wow.
You know, here, let me get the light on it. You see, this is sort of an almond-shaped brown object. Now, this is from Africa. You can see that it's obviously something artificially created.
Right.
This is a type of tool called a hand axe. And it's recognizable to Paleolithic archaeologists as a 57 Chevy would be to a teenage boy, right, when I was growing up. It's technology, the way it's made, its shape, its form, are unique to a period of time and to forms of pre-humans who made this. Originally, they were created in Africa, and then as humans migrated out of Africa to people Eurasia, they left behind these. The fossils of the humans are rare. The stone tools are common. You know where to look and what to look for. So one of my great discoveries was back in the 90s. I found one of these in Ypres at a place called Kokkinopoulos, deeply buried and over 250,000 years in age. In 2008, I found these on the island of the southern coast. And since Crete has been an island for 5.5 million years, cut off from the mainland, the presence of these objects on Crete, dating back over 130,000 years ago, also show that these early humans were probably seafarers and were occupying the offshore islands. Some of the earliest evidence of that activity ever. We used to think seafaring went back about 5,000 years. Then we pushed it to 10, then 15. Now we pushed it back over 130,000 years.
Wow.
And I think probably it goes back vastly farther. So I spend my time when I'm in Greece poking around in odd places looking for things like this. And archaeology is a collaborative field, both in classical archaeology, Aegean prehistory, and that's why the school and the Wiener Laboratory and the Gonadius Library are all together on a single campus, because work goes on in the laboratory, it goes on in the field, it goes on in the classroom, it goes on in the library. And all those materials are the resources that we draw upon in order to do this research.
Well, since you bring up the school, when were you first introduced to the American school? When did you first attend?
We're just talking about that, my wife and I, because when I was headed over there for the first time to Greece, my mentor said we should visit the American school. I said, what school is that? She said, the American School of Classical Studies at Athens. Okay. Why should I go? She said, well, first of all, if you're going to spend any time in Greece, you're going to end up working with that, because that is the organization for all American scientists. Second of all, they had the best water fountain in Athens. So I was there in the summer. It was hot. I went. And one of the things that both my wife and I remember was that, because we visited there at different times, but when I came out of the school, that's when I noticed the Gonadius Library for the first time, because I looked across the street up the hill and I said, what's that? There was this tremendously beautiful building that just stopped me dead in my tracks, and I didn't know what it was. And somebody said, oh, that's the Gonadius Library, the Gonadian. I had no idea what it was at that time. I would, come to know what it was and do, some really wonderful research within its walls. But that sort of fixed my memory. So that would have been my very first trip, 1973. And then as I returned, in fact, I was back the next year in April as we started our excavations. And from that point on, of course, I was regularly a member. I was a Fulbright fellow there in the 1970s, and then a senior member ever since.
You mentioned you held up the hand tool and you said you need to know where to look for things like that. Can you just
Yeah.
can you describe where do you look and maybe some of your other excavations around Greece or elsewhere?
Yeah.
What is it that you're looking for in terms of you know finding tools like that and other instrument artifacts, I should say?
Well, that's a very good question, and I even encourage students to ask that if they didn't think of it, because it's the sort of thing that people wonder about archaeology, and there are many ways in which to find places to. We're looking for the things that left behind by hunters and gatherers, people who lived before the time of agriculture, civilization, and they were looking for particular places in the landscape where there was usually fresh water, where they could find available game for hunting, where they could find the kinds of rocks that they needed to make tools out of, weapons and shelters. And so I've collaborated with geomorphologists, geologists, climatologists to reconstruct the landscape as it would have been at different time periods. Because as you know, with the ice age or ice ages over the past 750,000 years, you get sea levels rise, sea level falls, Greece expands, contracts, the climate is colder and wetter, it is drier, colder and drier, warmer and wetter. And as a consequence, the vegetation changes, the shoreline configuration changes. So we have to go back and reconstruct the landscape as it would have appeared at a time of interest, say 100,000 years ago. And then you mark the places on the landscape where you would have camped, hunted, lived if you had been those people. And then you go look. And in fact, since the early 90s, we've used remote sensing to do this, satellite imagery, multispectral scanning, and we basically make predictive models that tell us where the people would have lived. And then we go there and we look for them. And if you know what to look for, then it's just a matter of getting down, and walking on the ground, sometimes crawling on hands and knees when you're looking for very small artifacts, and searching the targeted areas.
Are you building trenches too? Are you building trenches?
Well,
like they do?
there are many ways to do archaeology. I tend to specialize on hunting down the places to look and finding traces that have eroded out of the ground. And then in another wave of research, groups of people then go in to actually do the excavation. So for instance, in Crete, I and my colleagues did a first 2-season work to map out the sites, and then another team went in the next 2 years to do the excavations. So I tend to like the other part, right?
Professor, you talked about some of the technology. Has the technology made it
The
easier?
greatest thing that ever happened was Google Earth, because I can. In fact, one of the most important sites we found in Crete, I discovered by sitting in the computer room at the downstairs in the American School of Classical Studies, just going through with Google Earth Professional.
Wow.
And just searching meter by meter along the southern coast of Crete until I spotted a geologic deposit that I thought would be the right.
Wow.
And then I just drove out there with my students, and just to show off, I drove right up to the outcrop and rolled the window down the car, right, and just pulled a stone tool out, right? Look like this, just to show them how it works.
First of all, you said your mentor, and you said she. I don't remember if I heard the name. Who was your mentor?
Well, I had several. One in classics. Her name was Elizabeth Banks. She just
Okay.
earlier this year, I'm sad to say, in her 90s.
Oh, yes, right.
Yeah, and then in anthropology, it was a woman named Anta Montoy, who was a very distinguished Paleolithic archaeologist, trained by, in the French
Mhm.
field of Paleolithic archaeology. So the two of them were my guides, but it was Betty Banks who said, ha, there's that site in Greece.
All right.
Yeah.
Great. And then another woman I want to ask you about is your wife, Priscilla.
Mhm.
So she's at BU as well. And what's her focus there?
Well, we have a little museum called the Gable Museum of Archaeology, and she's basically the curator. It's just a small research and teaching museum. She curates that museum studies are one of her favorite things. And then, of course, we work together in the field, both in Greece. We also work in California, as it happens, on early human sites there. And her specialty is she finds things. I show her where to look, and then while other people are talking to me and distracting my attention, she finds things. So she's my secret
Wow.
weapon.
Professor, thanks to George, I attended my first Archaeological Institute of America get together pre-COVID here in Washington D.C., where I'm at,
Mhm.
and I understand you and congratulate you for receiving their gold award,
Thank you.
which is their gold medal,
Mhm.
which is very prestigious. Can you talk about a little bit about what was that like for you?
Well, it's an annual award, and as George said, it's the top award of the Archaeological Institute of America, and since it's one of only two professional organizations of archaeologists, and the oldest, and it was founded, or I should say, what's the word I want to use? It was incorporated by an act of Congress back in the 1880s. So it's the oldest and most prestigious of the organizations, and so to get that medal is a significant achievement. And of course, I was proud, but I was also very humbled because it means that your colleagues appreciate what you've done, because they have to. You can't ask to be put up for this medal. Somebody has to propose you, and then it's a very long process of documentation and going through a number of committees. So I know that it's a very um, time-consuming and difficult and competitive process for the people who are backing you. So when you get the call and say you've been given this medal, I was aware of all those people who must have worked to do that, and I was ever so grateful for it.
The focus of tonight, we wanted to talk about your innate passion. And I've come to know Curtis personally through the American School and have had the ability to have lunch with him on several occasions. And it's one in which I don't want to get up and leave. I just want to keep hearing stories and to see the look in his eyes. And outside of being a gold medal winning classical, archaeologist, you actually have a passion for collecting books, manuscripts, and artifacts from Greece's past. And I want you to talk about that for a moment, how that came about and what types of things you're looking for. And as you do this, I just want to tell our audience that we're proud to announce that on May 6th, we're having it's supposed to be in person, but it's a virtual gala for the American School of Classical Studies at Athens. And Curtis Runnels is actually receiving the Gonadius Prize, not for his archaeology, but for his book collecting as a benefactor, a Philhellene, a scholar, and just an amazing individual. So we'll talk about that in a second, but why don't we get into that now?
We've traced the disease back to its origin, and it was at a yard sale. I was paddling along when I was about 16 years old. I had just realized I wanted to be an archaeologist, and somebody's having a yard sale, and there was an old book sitting out on a card table, and I bought it for the princely sum of a quarter. I still have the book. It was published in like 1930. And even though this was 1966, that still seemed to me like antediluvian in age. I didn't know they had writing then. So I was amazed to see a book of such tremendous age. Oh, wasn't that amazing? I loved it. I loved the way it felt. I loved the way it smelled, and it had really great stuff in it. And so I started to just accumulate old books. Now, mind you, that was not collecting, that was accumulating. I just wanted them for their content, but I liked them because they were also old and they looked nice. They were more interesting. So I started picking them up in an antique shop when I would go by, or I would, find one, maybe in a library sale. And then, the years pass and the epiphany, if I could call it that, came when I was a graduate student. And I had now gotten interested enough, I was going to the rare book libraries to look at rare books that they had, because also they are primary documents. So I was doing research on certain things relating to Greek prehistory and early archaeology, prehistoric archaeology. And I would be reading about how some scholar like Sir Arthur Evans, who excavated the palace of Minos at Knossos, what he had written in his books. Well, those were in the rare book collection. So I would go to get the actual book out to read, do my research, because I wanted to get that from him, not from somebody who just talked about the content. And so I was haunting the rare book libraries. This is now in Indiana University, where the Lilly Library is a fabulous resource of antiquarian books. And that same Betty Banks that we talked about at KU had also brought out a beautiful copy of Stewart and Revett's Antiquities of Athens, huge thing, size of the coffee table, from like the 1770s. I could hardly believe that such a book still existed, much less that you could actually look at it and turn the pages, see what it looked like. But the epiphany came when I went to visit somebody who was staying in a professor's house at BU, and I walked in, and on the shelf of that professor's house in his study were some of the same books I've been looking at in the rare book library. He owned them. And then it hit me, of course, they're books, you could buy them. Priscilla wishes this never happened. So I saw that, and then from that point on, right, it was just a matter of, as my means increased, I, began to collect books. And I collect in the area of Greece, as you would imagine, everything to do with Greece. Greek people who travel to Greece, people who talk about the archaeology of Greece, books that were printed in Greece, newspapers, documents, rare books, anything whatsoever to do with Greece, from earliest times to early modern times. The earlier, the better. And I also have collections that relate to the American West, the Southwest, where I work. And I have collections on the history of archaeology. I have some specialized collections. Like right now, I'm collecting books on navigation and seafaring. So I have various interests like that. And then this material is also research material, so that I don't collect them and put them in a glass case just to look at. I use them. I read them. I use them in my research. And I've published material based on what I've researched in these books. So that's why I'm also interested in donating these books as I finish with them to the Gonadius Library, because they should be used by future scholars. And I often remind people, that this is what book collections are, what's supposed to happen to them. In other words, you put them together, you enjoy them, you love them, but the day comes when they've got to go somewhere, and you want to put them into either back in the market so that people can acquire them for their own collections, and there are people who do that, and I do that with books that don't relate to Greece, and otherwise steer them into institutions where they will now be available to everybody. And I think, George, I told you at one of these lunches that you're remembering about how, for me, some of these books, they just said to me, I want to go home, meaning back to Greece and back to Athens. So I feel it's almost like my duty. I just bought one. Well, here, I'll show it to you. I've got, let me, wait, where did I put it? Right, oh, it's over here. Don't worry. Ah, there it is. I've got it in my sticky little fingers. All right, look at this. It says Brigands de la Grèce. And it's a remarkable little pamphlet. You won't see things like this very often. In fact, I haven't found that another one exists so far as I can tell. It opens up, it's a single piece of paper like this.
Oh, wow.
Printed in Paris And it is reporting on what are called the Delessy murders. It was a very famous case of where some high-ranking British were kidnapped on their way out to Marathon. And after a failed attempt to release them, they were murdered by the brigands. And it became a cause célèbre, and almost there was a British gunship sent to the Piraeus. It was almost a war between Britain and Greece over this. And this was printed in Paris to advise the public about it. And right here's a little stamp saying to be sold by the newsmongers on the Seine. And I don't know, this might be the only copy. I just
Where'd you find it? Where'd you get it?
Well, it was a it was a bookseller in Great Britain, Lymington, Lymington, Great Britain. And it was at a virtual book fair. I hate virtual book fairs, but I couldn't stay away, and I nabbed this little beauty. So something like this, the Gonadius doesn't have it, but now they do, right? It's just a matter of getting it over to them. That's what I'm doing. I'm just thinking this is something that is needed in Greece, needed to fill out the Gonadius collections, so that they have this kind of, in this particular case, an ephemeral piece of basically newsprint that otherwise would be unavailable to scholars.
By way of background, we're mentioning the Gonadius. This is a broad audience. Some people may not know. Just say a couple words about Gonadius, the person. What he was. He was a bibliophile. He was in your continuation of that legacy. Just talk about him for a second and how he left, so that they understand that it's not just a building, but it was a person.
All right. Well, since we're into show and tell, I had also.
What was the date of that Brigands, Professor?
Oh, that was about 1870, I think it was.
Okay, wow.
Yeah. Okay, here we are. Here's a picture of John Gonadius
Oh, wow.
from a British publication called Punch. And here is a letter of Gonadius's on his stationery that I have. These are things I put out to, for the Gonadius Library. John Gonadius was one of the greatest book collectors of our age. He was born in Greece to a very distinguished family, Corfu, and he would then end up having a diplomatic career. He was appointed as the ambassador of Greece to the court of St. James in England. And he took up his residence in London, where he basically lived the rest of his life. He's actually buried in London. Never forgetting his homeland and always serving his country as a patriot, he lived his life in England. And he became a book collector. And by the time he died, he had collected, I think, close to 30,000 rare books and another 20,000 pieces of ephemera, like the one I was just showing you, maps and other documents. And the late 1890s and into the first 2 decades of the 20th century, that was an enormous number of books. An incredible thing about it was he elected to collect books about Greece that referred to Greece after classical antiquity. Because up until that time, book collectors, if they collected anything on Greece, they collected things that related to ancient Greece, pretty much. Like ancient Greek authors, like editions of Aristotle or Homer, that sort of thing. That was the most popular area because book collectors tended to have studied classics when they were in school, so they related to it, mostly about language. And Gonadius was the first that I know of book collector to think to collect everything that related to Greece after antiquity. So he pulled together that collection, which was still, to this day, the largest and most important collection of that sort. And he did it at just the right time, because that material was almost valueless in the market in the day. And so he was able to collect things that today are simply unobtainable. And then at the peak of his career, he decided to give it to the people of Greece. and to do this through the medium of the American School of Classical Studies at Athens. This was suggested to him when he was on a visit to Washington, and the Carnegie Foundation in New York financed it, built the building for it. And while it belongs to Greece, it is in the custody of the American School of Classical Studies at Athens. He was a very shrewd diplomat, Gonadius. And he not only filled it with the 50,000 books and pieces of ephemera, but also artworks, artifacts like things relating to Lord Byron that he had collected and other objects. But, and this is why I really liked John Gonadius, he continued to collect. So even after he had given everything away, he started buying again, and he bought another 3,000 books, before he died. I really admire John Gonadius. There's not enough about the man, actually. Francis Walton wrote a little paper on him as a bibliophile, and so did David Nichols, who was another director of the Gonadius Library. A couple of little things, but a full biography has never really been done. And
Really?
we have some knowledge of his earlier collection that he was forced to sell off because there was one point where he fell out of political favor and retained his position. And he basically had to sell his collection just to make ends meet. But then he was reappointed ambassador and also married a rich English lady. So conveniently, was able to reacquire books. And so much more we'd like to know about him. There was another collector, name was Henry Myron Blackmer. And he lived in Athens in the period after the Second World War, and he amassed the second collection that I would consider of any importance. That was basically along the same lines. Did not go into an institution, but on Sotheby's back in 1989. Very famous auction. Everybody who collects Greek books remembers it well. And one of the things I do is I watch for any book that has his bookplate in it. So I buy back Blackmer's books and then see that they go to the Gonadius, so that Blackmer will get joined up with Gonadius.
Yeah. Professor, I find it fascinating about how literature, books, art, I know John Camp tells a fantastic story about, is it the Dodworth paintings?
The Dodwells.
The Dodwell paintings in the 1890s. And then Pausanias's books, and how they helped how helped John Camp and other archaeologists basically figure out what they're looking at the Agora. So I find that connection very fascinating. Can you describe that a little bit in your own work? How some of these books have touched upon your own work as an archaeologist or as a classicist?
Well, I think John Camp probably gave you a very good view of that. Is that there were, not only. Well, here I'll just see if I could come up with a concrete example. But because of the interest amongst Europeans in Greece, from based on their classical education, probably since the 15th century, people have been traveling there.
Yes.
George Wheeler and Jacob Spon. George Wheeler from England, Jacob Spon from Lyon, France. In the 1670s, they visited Greece, spent a long time in Athens, and made drawings of the Parthenon before it was destroyed in the Venetian Wars in 1687. They copied inscriptions, and also they described places, landscapes, showing and produced maps as well to show where things were located. Preserving, as they did, evidence for what the landscape was like hundreds of years ago. That's just absolutely invaluable.
Yes.
Because so many changes have come along to change the land. Buildings have been lost, things have disappeared, things have been altered. And these books are vital sources, especially the ones that have illustrations. And also, I learned when I was doing my dissertation, they sometimes would talk about something. I was trying to look for, I was trying to search down a source of some rare stone. I won't go into the point of why I was trying to do that. That's not so interesting. But I was just trying to find out where this stone came from. And it turned out that a German traveling in the islands in the 1830s, at the request of the new Greek government in Athens, they wanted him to figure out what mining possibilities there were on the island. So he's a mining engineer. So wherever he went, he made note of every kind of rock that he saw and every kind of useful mineral and this sort of thing. And his book was like a little travel log telling me, here's where these rocks are here. And I was able to then go and find the rocks I was looking for by following this German's directions from almost 170 years earlier. And I would have wasted a lot of time if I hadn't have had that guide in my hand. Just like Schliemann used Homer, and Pausanias to figure out where to dig at Troy and at Mycenae.
Were the earliest humans in Greece found in Naxos about 200,000 years ago?
They are of the same group.
Thank you, Jim Barakis, for asking.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
We have now the oldest humans are found outside of Megalopoli, where an excavation now being, one of the participants is contributors is from the American School of Classical Studies, and that excavation, is a fossil elephant find and stone tools associated with it, and it dates to 500,000 years ago.
Wow.
Yeah, Knox about 250. The Cretan finds probably in that same range. There's a site on Lesbos too called Rhodophnevia, which is probably about 350,000 years in age, and so on. So we're seeing accumulating evidence that in the last 500,000 years, Greece was not only occupied by human beings or their ancestors, but also Greece was not a cul-de-sac, it was like a bridge in Europe. And that people were moving through Greece and back as well as settling within Greece.
Okay, well, I'm glad.
George, at the time, Doctor, was Greece 500,000 years ago? I know that the world was once connected. Gaia, did it look differently back then too, as far as because of all the earthquakes and I think it's a big tectonic plate going through there. So did it look different then?
The biggest changes were dictated by climate because depending on, in the last 750,000 years, about 40, 50 times we've had cold advances where the glacial ice caps have expanded. So Greece would have had glaciers in the mountains, and the temperature was depressed to about what it would be in the Alps today, and sea levels were drawn down by about 140 meters, so that Greece was about twice as large as it is now. That is, the coastal shelves with dry land. And so it would have been extremely different. The vegetation consisted primarily of just sage, brush, right? There were almost no trees, and you would have had large herds of different kinds of elephant ancestors like mammoth, straight-tusked elephant, hippopotamus, rhinoceros, antelopes. One tiny detail at Frankfurt Cave, the place I started, down in the southern Argolid, right next to Philhellene and Gonadius, very arid, warm place, particularly in the summer.
Yes.
We found in the excavation, by carefully sifting the soil, the bones of mice from about 30,000 years ago. And these mice were of a species that today only live in high alpine meadows.
Unbelievable.
So at that time, 30,000 years ago, it was as cold at what is today's sea level, where people are sitting on the beach, as it is now, up in the alpine tundra. A bookseller in Connecticut, New Haven, Connecticut, offered me an archive of papers from the first undergraduate American to attend an excavation in Greece, or at least in Greek area. This was the excavations of Assos, and the student was from Harvard, and this was 1881. And he was there for 2 seasons and spent the winter in Athens, and returned to Boston, and 2 years later died, quite tragically, when he was only in his 20s. And somehow his papers were preserved, diaries, stories. He met Heinrich Schliemann. He went to his house. He interviewed Schliemann. He met all these other important people. He traveled especially to Chios, where he walked over the whole island, and he wrote wonderful stories about, life as it was in the 1880s in the islands and in Athens. And all these papers were somewhere, we don't know where. All I knew was that the bookseller had them. So I bought them. And then I wrote a blog post for the American School of Classical Studies has an archives, and the archivist has a blog called the Archivist's Notebook. So I wrote a blog, and I wrote about them and described them, and some photographs, especially talking about Heinrich Schliemann. The quote that we used for the title is, he said, "All Americans must be Trojans at heart." We're still wondering, what did Schliemann mean by that? But anyway, we wondered about those. We wrote about them in this blog and illustrated them. And then I got an email out of the blue from a man in New York City. Now we're getting to the east part, George. So this man saw the blog, and he said, "I know that stuff." He said, "I'm the one who sold them to the bookseller." He said, "I was walking down the street, and there was a dumpster out in front of some apartment building, and that stuff was in the dumpster." And he pulled it out, and he said, "My God, this has got, this is valuable." And he said he and his wife went back to the dumpster like 5 days running after that, hoping desperately that more would appear. And they didn't find any more. But it was saved by a whisker. So they sold it to the bookseller. The bookseller sold it to me, and now it resides safely in Athens in the school archives. Thank heavens. One other thing for show and tell, because we do have just a couple of minutes.
Yeah.
Look at this. I'll bring this up. When you see it's hard to see in these.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Yeah.
And what you can't experience is what I'm experiencing.
Oh,
It reeks of Moscow Livano.
Incense.
Yes,
Right.
that's right. And also, I think my nose is very sensitive to books, and I can also smell wax, right, from the candles. This book, it has this lovely new binding, which is from 1820, something like that. And inside, there's a little note telling us that this book was found on Mount Athos. And it says it was from a monastery there. And that note is in a hand that would date it to about 1790 to 1800. And I found various people who were going through Athos at that time collecting books, one of whom was Lord Elgin's secretary, a man named William Hamilton, who was sent by Elgin to rummage through the libraries in Athos. He was known to have brought books back for Elgin, but he also left behind some in Italy, and this has an Italian binding. What's important about it, it's a manuscript. So it's handwritten by 4 different hands over a period of several centuries, beginning in the 15th century. And I collect things like this because this is unique, and it's unrecorded, and it's unpublished. And in the middle of it, right here, I'll remove this little piece of paper. Starting right here, where my finger is tapping, is an account of the fall of Constantinople.
Wow.
Are you kidding me? And where did you find this book?
Pages.
Where did you get this one?
I found this in London at an antiquarian book dealer 25 years ago. And there you have it. It's been traveling for centuries, 500 years, and it contains who knows what else.
For our audience, we're living in this crazy time where, we want to do away with Homer, we want to do away with the founding fathers, we want to do away with the classics. Why are the classics important? Why are they relevant? Why are they meaningful? Why should students continue, if not major in it, at least study the classics and keep them near and dear to them?
Well, I've never actually been asked that question before, but believe it or not, I can think of an answer pretty quickly. In fact, I still have this rock in my hands.
Yeah.
Right? So this rock is Henry David Thoreau, right? Our famous New England philosopher, called it a mind print. He said a human mind shaped it, right? That is, the hands did the work, but the mind directed the work. It preserves a thought. And by collecting these, I can learn something about the thoughts of very distant ancestors, something about what motivated them, how they thought, what they were doing. And books, the classical texts, preserve the thoughts of those people who came before us. And up until the time of writing and the time of printing, these thoughts evaporated, with the death of the person. The conversation disappeared, their conclusions about life, their science or philosophy, the discoveries they made disappeared. But with writing and printing, they were preserved. And books were one of the most important discoveries of human technology, a way of script, of course, and ultimately printing, but the idea of finding a way to externalize thought in a preserved medium and to then store it indefinitely is an absolutely incredible resource. No other organism that's ever lived on this planet in the last 3.5 billion years has ever had that. To know their past and actually have preserved evidence of it and be able to read it. And I can tell you that anybody who thinks that we know what those ancient authors like Plato had to say, that we've mined it all out, are crazy. Every generation goes back to that well and drinks again and sees something different that wasn't seen by the previous generation.
Yes.
If we didn't have those texts, we would have lost all of that. It is fundamental to human existence, to our knowledge and to our growth as human beings, to have that resource. And just think of it, to be able to walk into a great library, whether it's the New York Public Library, the Library of Congress in Washington, where I've also done research, or the Gonadius Library in Athens, and be able to pick these books up, whether they're unique like these manuscripts or printed in 1 million copies, and be able to actually commune directly with the mind of somebody like Plato is a miracle. It's just simply a miracle. And anybody who would say we don't need this, don't want it, or past that, is simply, they're not firing on all cylinders, Art. And I cannot even think about that. It's a meaningless thought for me.
Well, on May 6th, as I mentioned before, we're having a virtual gala for the American School of Classical Studies at Athens. There's the hard copy invitation. Maria, and that night we are celebrating Curtis Runnels. He'll be receiving the Gonadius Prize. As part of that, there are several things that are very exciting. Maria Kosmakos, if you can pull up those slides for a moment, there are several elements to the evening. One of the elements is going to start with a virtual cocktail hour. That cocktail hour, I'm very excited to say, will take place at 5:30 to 6:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and is going to feature John Camp, our professor and director of Athena Agora. He'll be giving a tour within the virtual world of Assassin's Creed. That's a video game created by Ubisoft, Assassin's Creed Odyssey. And that was created in part by using research conducted at the American School. So John Camp, together with Dr. Stephanie N. Ruata, are going to be leading, she's doing a little intro, and then he'll be taking us as a character in the game throughout all different parts of ancient Greece. And he'll point out the things that are accurate, maybe some things that aren't accurate, but it's going to be pretty incredible.
Incredible.
Yeah, it's going to be, and actually Art was the brainstorm behind this, saying, let's get into this. And in the National Hellenic Society, we work together as a team. So this has come to fruition. I have seen it. It will blow you away. Go to the next slide too. We're also going to have a sneak peek of the exhibit, The Free and the Brave, which is co-sponsored by the U.S. Embassy. And that's really exciting. Do you have the Free and the Brave slide? I don't know if you have that one. But what's exciting about that, we're also looking in the future together with the National Hellenic Society to do the Free and the Brave exhibit together with Cliffs of Freedom. So, in Coates and Hall. So we're looking forward to do that as well. The Free and the Brave.
In celebration of the bicentennial of the Greek War of Independence, which is
right. So that night you're going to see it's the story of the American Philhellenes and the glorious struggle of the Greeks. So that night we're going to give you a sneak peek of different artifacts. We're then going to take you to ancient Corinth, where you're going to see Roman wall paintings that were uncovered at the excavations there, and how we're conserving them today in the new apotheki. That's at ancient Corinth, and that's going to be amazing. And ultimately, this is all within one. The virtual cocktail hour is about an hour, and then after that is a 1 hour gala. And the highlight of the evening is going to be the presentation of the Gonadius Prize to Curtis Runnels. And we're unveiling a world premiere of a short film, and one of many short films that we produced that have been sponsored by Charles Yoder, another Philhellene, and together with Audi Productions. We put an outstanding, I think it's a great film, and we have a little trailer to show you now, just a really quick snapshot of the piece, and it really takes you into the world of Curtis Runnels. It's called Curtis Runnels. I believe it's Philhellene scholar, bibliophile, and benefactor.
And good guy, too. And a good guy, too.
Yeah, and a good guy. Okay, let's... Your volume? Wait, you want to start it over with the volume? Well, you can't hear it. I think...
To afford this book, he named...
Let's start it over, yeah, 1 second.
...to a bookseller. And down in a glass case, he had a Greek manuscript. And you just don't see Greek manuscripts. I looked at it, I really wanted it, my heart's beating loudly. Please let me be able to afford this book. He named a price, I paid it. And then he said something about the others in a box. Box? What box?
So it's about an 8-minute short film. I've watched it, I've seen it. We're going to premiere it that night. And then we're also going to have a segment on innovative technology. The Prime Minister is giving a greeting, and it's going to be a tremendous event. And at the end, we'll have a breakout sessions, and one of the breakout sessions will be Curtis Runnels. So I did want to ask, thank Maria. She put in the comments section here the Gala website, gala.acsca.org. And we encourage you to purchase a ticket. We have made the ticket, since it's virtual, $100 is a low amount that we've put up there. So we hope that you'll pass it on and be there that night to celebrate. And we thank the National Hellenic Society for allowing us to showcase Curtis Runnels.
And George, if I may, George, for the folks out there that are, hopefully, I know Greece is relaxing a lot of its travel restrictions, but in the future, we go to Greece, make sure you go to the campus and visit the campus. Yeah. And make sure you see, thanks to George Makrikostas and his family, the Makrianis building, where you'll see some incredible exhibits, including the Zographos paintings, that Curtis, I think you'll agree, they're really the first documentary, I think, because they're beautiful paintings, but describe the different battles, and they're footnoted with what happened. And I was awestruck to see all the different battles. And I didn't even, we heard one or two when we were growing up as Greek American kids in Greek school, but we didn't hear about so many of the other battles, and they come to life. And make sure you stop by the college. It's no one knows about it. It's right behind the U.S. Embassy, right in near Kolonaki. So it's just a treasure.
So Curtis, I have a question for you. The one thing, do you remember what you said to me when we were sitting in BU, which is an amazing university institution, and I thought about how I've seen your list of, and that film actually ends with the listing of what Priscilla and Curtis are gifting to the school, but to the Gonadius. But I asked you, so why the Gonadius, and why not be you or something else? Do you remember what you said to me? You said because they need to go back home.
I wanted to go back home, exactly.
And I got choked up as a Greek American. I was like, it's these books are like children dispersed, like the people of the diaspora all over the world. And for an American to say to go back home, I just,
Would you consider being a trustee at the British Museum, Curtis?
I'll see what I could do about that. Yes.
I don't know. My mind went when he was talking, Lord Elgin's secretary going to Mount Athos, taking the books there. My mind.
And if I may, Curtis, you'll enjoy this story too. When my first visit to Mount Athos, went into one of the libraries, Musil, which is near Karies, and about 10th century. So the vicar, I guess, shows me, the secretary shows me the library, and it's the old skeleton key, like right out of the pirate movies, this giant skeleton key and the big thick steel door, and he's showing me around, and he goes, and from here, Mr. Dimopoulos, he goes, is our modern collection from 1500 on, Never forget that moment. Yeah.
I love the perception of what is old in America and what is old in Greece. Right. I was in Bryant Park one day, and I happened across two Greeks from Greek nationals who were having coffee, and I just struck up a conversation. And they go in bits and places in different places, and they just came from DC. I said, "Oh, did you love it?" He said, "Oh, it was beautiful." He tells me in Greek, "It was beautiful, but we passed by a house. I don't know if this is exactly the date, but he says, and it said first house in Washington D.C., something like 1790, whatever it was, 96." And he goes, "My grandmother's house in the village is from the 1500s." What is this? This is new architecture. The new world. Well, thank you.
Well, with that, I just want to thank you, George, for the honor of introducing a new friend. Our, a little self-promotion, our annual event will be in Las Vegas in October. Professor, we invite you as our guest to join.
Curtis, you got a
great time to meet other Hellenes, Philhellenes, and friends, and we're dedicating this year's celebrations to Philhellenes that had a big impact, actually, in the Greek War of Independence. On behalf of the National Hellenic Society, we want to thank you for all your work, your dedication, your passion, your gifts. And I've said this before, Socrates was asked, what's the meaning of life? And to make it short, he said, to be a noble Athenian. And of course, as a lawyer, begs the question, and what is a noble Athenian? And he said, to leave Athens better than one found it. And you certainly, sir, are a noble Athenian, and your wife as well, in every sense of the word. So for that, we thank you very much. And pleased to host this along with the American School of Classical Studies, and bid you kalinichta. Good night.
Hope to see you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you all. Good night.